G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube. After a much needed bye for the West Coast Eagles in both the WAFL and AFL, and if I'm being honest, it was nice to have the weekend off myself after a pretty busy first half to 2025. Today I'll be covering the WAFL Eagles hit out against Claremont this afternoon in a reasonably honourable loss, along with a few really impressive performances from our up-and-coming talent in the twos. For today's WAFL Watch review, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, who our best performers were, both AFL and WAFL listed players, my key takeaways from the match, as well as my predictions for who is pushing for a spot in the AFL side next week. So to give a little bit of insight, the WAFL Eagles came in with 13 AFL listed players today. I wasn't sure what the numbers would be, just with outs like Tyrell Jawar coming after that Tuesday injury report. And I also noticed that our second mid-season draftee, Jacob Newton, wasn't out there as well, which is a bit of a loss given that he's shown a bit in his brief time in the WAFL Eagles. But just most importantly, they weren't really on the injury list, so I don't know quite what was happening until I saw the list once the game was underway. From my point of view, watching, I thought it was a really well-fought contest all day, excluding a bad second quarter. Claremont looked like they're a really genuine premiership contender this year in the WAFL. And the entire WAFL Eagles squad fought really well across all three lines of the field as well. So it wasn't really lost with one really weak section, which is really good to see from our twos. Across the middle, Tom Gross looked like a one-man wrecking ball and really kept us competitive against the top-tier mids at Claremont, who I did mention when we played them earlier this year, does have multiple Sandover medalists in that side. In the end, I thought every player ran the game out all the way through to the final siren as well. Even though we didn't score a goal in that fourth quarter, there were a lot of opportunities. So that wasn't as dominant as the second quarter was for Claremont, even though it probably looked that way on the scoreboard. And there were also some really impressive performances from our best players today that I found really encouraging, not just for next week, maybe in the AFL side, but also for West Coast and our long-term rebuild, which I'll explain more as I go through our best players as well as something in my key takeaways as well. So at the top of the list, by an absolute mile today, was Tom Gross. He finished with 28 disposals, which was already really impressive, but just as importantly, the number of those that would have been contested possessions would have been well over half, if I had to guess. Like I always say, they don't give you those stats on the WAFL sheets. And the quality of his disposals from the inside to the outside was also elite. It's probably a funny comparison to make because I've never really compared these two guys looking at them, especially physically, but it was like watching WAFL Matt Rowell out there hitting the ball with just maximum intensity every time he was anywhere near it, often even buried deep in the contested pack. So I know I've already made a big call about Tom McCarthy being an A-grader a few weeks ago, although I do feel slightly vindicated by his AFL debut since. But I actually feel pretty safe in saying that Tom Gross is going to become a star for West Coast as well, probably in a few years from now, but not particularly long, maybe two years, I'd say. It's not a long jump. For an 18-year-old to be dominating the senior WAFL the way he is already, just along with the conditioning that he still has ahead of him, is nuts. It's not like he's even, one of those man-child 18-year-olds pulled into the AFL system like Matt Rowell or Shannon Hearn or Daniel Rich types, if you can sort of picture what I'm trying to describe, which does leave so much room for him to improve long-term just in the weights room as well as his fitness and conditioning overall. Next best for us today was Campbell Chesser, who didn't pull the same numbers as Gross or Bazzo did, but pretty much managed to break into open space with almost every one of his disposals for the day. It's been really encouraging to see Campbell Chesser show the composure and confidence that he has since returning from yet another long-term injury this year, just because that's been his biggest obstacle since being drafted, not the injuries that is, but his composure and confidence. And all that potential that he clearly has is finally starting to be matched by his output because of the shift there. He opened a lot of space around the ground with all of his disposals and was hitting targets with really high efficiency, also usually over distances between 40 to 50 metres. So that's actually something you don't see too much from accurate field passing. Usually those kicks at that distance hit packs or hit contests, but he was hitting a lot of really good targets over a longer distance. And I think once you start breaking the lines the way that he does, you give your teammates upfield the opportunity to run into open spaces that usually don't exist when the opposition zone is set up behind the ball. So that's part of what I credit it for, but also his movement by foot was also quite impressive. So between those two, it was actually really good to see. Personally, I'd like to see him at least get a 1-year contract extension for next year, just because that impact is something I'd really hope to see from him in the AFL one day. And I think that he's starting to show where his potential and his capabilities going. Number 3, Malachi Champion went to another level today. He didn't have a heap of the football, which is what you get from those high half forwards. But every touch he had looked like he had a little force field around him, just running freely without anybody getting a finger on him, often even in the middle of congestion. So he finished with 1 goal and he missed another one narrowly under a lot of pressure. But like Chesser, it was really his playmaking that did it for me. When you give yourself that kind of space, you open the field up for all your teammates too, which is what he did. Number 4, as usual, Rhett Bazzo was in our best again this week. He was our highest possession getter, I think, with 30. And after stringing together most of this season uninjured now, though he did miss a lot of preseason with injury, he is starting to find his way into my known quantity for us at this stage. He finished the game, like I said, with the most disposals on the ground, although there were a lot from kickouts, which doesn't quite count as much. But as always, he just looked really reliable with the ball in hands or last line of defence sitting under a high ball coming inside 50. So I thought that he's basically just stitching together a lot of consistency more than anything. Other good efforts came from Locke Rawlinson, who I think had close to his best game for us this year. Noah Long as well, who's still a long way off what we saw from him at AFL level in his first year. But he's starting to really build back into just some of the impacts that he has with the little things he does, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. Callum Jamieson starting to look comfortable again out there after losing a ton of conditioning with his time on the sidelines. He took a few really important intercept marks and just didn't look off the pace at all, which is really good to see. While Luca Grego finished really strong with some of the tougher moments from any player during the match. He took one massive hit running with a fly to the ball and eventually managed to get back up and just kept on going. Our Waffle Eagles had some really strong performances too. Josh Burke finished with the match with 3 goals, including one absolute blinder from the boundary just inside 50 in the third quarter. And I think that was the 3rd in a row for West Coast. So it was really timely getting us back into the match after a bad second quarter. Co-captains Shannon Lucassen and Jack Eastoff both had a solid impact, with Eastoff probably having his best game for the year so far, I'd imagine. And that pretty much brings me to my key takeaways for the match. My first one's probably a little bit mundane, but it's one of those important minor details, and that is that a lot of guys are finally getting some consistent games and conditioning. So guys like I've mentioned, Campbell Chesser, who spent more of his career injured than fit, as well as Bazzo and Jamieson, who I've also mentioned, they all look like they're finally getting a chance to build their fitness and craft without interruption for once. So with West Coast really deep into our rebuild now, it's a detail that we probably need a little bit more than people realise. I mean, as a minimum, it means that we'll be able to rely on our depth, especially in key defence, which is a really vulnerable part of the field right now. But the way Chess has looked lately, it could also save the career of a guy who looks like he's got quite a high ceiling. Again, my second key takeaway is probably a bit mundane as well, but it's also important. And that is that our system as a squad in the Waffle looks really well established now, which I have mentioned in multiple games this season. But it's nice to reiterate, especially in a loss like the one that we had today. So we might have lost by quite a fair margin, but don't make the mistake of assuming we didn't play well. Everybody looked reasonable out there. And at the end of the day, a lot of these losses in the Waffle are just coming down to us being a bit thinner for top-end talent compared to our opposition. I mean, remember, this is a senior state league competition. So the guys that our young first year and second year draftees are up against, they're not amateurs. And then there's also a lot of ex-AFL players in their prime, alongside fully established men in the semi-professional league that a lot of our kids are up against. So now that I've covered everything else, though, let's take a look at what everyone's favourite segment of Waffle Watch is, which is my predictions for who's pushing for a spot in the AFL next week. As always, starting from the top most likely is Tom Gross, purely based on performance. Gross will be pushing to force his way into the AFL side that plays later on tonight. So hopefully everyone performs, because right now there's genuine pressure on the AFL mids to hold their spots, which is a good problem to have. Number 2, I think Rhett Bazzo is in line for a spot as a third key tall in defence, really just based on how the key defenders play tonight as well as how they pull up. I know that Edwards was under an injury cloud last time, so really Bazzo's next in line. I'm not really predicting that he'll be in the squad next week, but he's there if needed, and I do predict that he will play AFL this year at some point, probably more than one game. 3, a bit like Bazzo, I do think Chesser should get a game at some point this year, the way he's going. Again, not necessarily in the coming week, but any time from now onwards, he looks up to it. Other than those, I think Malachi Champion's an outside chance at the moment for a debut, while just positionally, Archer Reed is never far off, even though today wasn't his best game. It's more, I suppose, what the squad at AFL level needs. Which pretty much brings me to a wrap for today's Waffle Watch. It's good to be back after the bye, and I hope everyone enjoyed this video. As always, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button, as this still makes a big difference to my ability to keep producing content like this. Otherwise, I hope everyone's looking forward to a respectable performance against Collingwood tonight, and hopefully I'll see you all again for my review of that. Until then.